What's up, fight fans? It's your boy, the Levi Roots of the Jab and Shoot. Both Starsky and Hutch of the Punch and Clutch, the first and last Earl of Fistiana, Jack Slack. And I bid you welcome to, I believe, the 59th episode of Fights Gone By podcast, coming at you on 22/11/2017, or t'other way around if you're American. Slow weekend, fight-wise. I mean, you know, it was all right, but one of the slowest main cards I've ever had to endure. I posted on Twitter in the morning, oh dear, everyone's telling me this card is awful, and I can already see that it's 3 hours long. And John Anik was like, yeah. But there was some cool stuff on the card. We'll talk about the cool stuff. In fact, the prelims were great, which is really good because apparently they had a great holdover from college football that was on the same channel. It was just the main card that sucked dick. And not in the cool way. But we got some news to deal with first. In fact, tons of news happened over the week. And the way that this works is that I start putting together the show notes for the episode. And I think, was that last week? And then I realised how much has happened in the week. I don't think we talked about Nate Diaz versus Tyron Woodley. Oh, it's not a good fight. And I don't think we talked about Holm versus Cyborg and all sorts of other stuff. So we got that to get into. We got the Belly tournament, which is what I'm now calling the Bellator's Fat Boy tournament. And we got fight. Well, we got questions over the legacy of Anderson Silva, and we got a fight between Michael Bisping and Kelvin Gastelum to look forward to, as well as the card with the most blanked out faces on the UFC website that I've ever seen. But before we do all that, if you are a Patreon boy, you can now head over to Patreon and you'll find a link to the episode on the Pride Lightweight Grand Prix. I had a ton of fun doing this one. Two of my all-time favourite events. I mean, Pride Bushido 9 is up there for maybe all-time favourite, and Shockwave 2005 isn't bad either. Except with the weird matches like Fedor versus Zulu, but then we got the Zulu out of it, so, you know. It's where we practiced the technique to use it on Tim Sylvia. If you're not a Patreon boy, do consider subscribing. It keeps me doing this podcast. It keeps the lights on in the studio. And it's very much appreciated. Thank you. Right now, let's do some news. Number 1, Frankie Edgar is out. This may have happened just after the podcast was released last week. Frankie Edgar is out with an injury, but Jose Aldo has offered to step in. This is, of course, to fight Max Holloway for the UFC featherweight title. Now, Aldo, his last fight was losing the title to Holloway, and Holloway hasn't fought since. I think this is pretty brave on Aldo's part. You know, if you consider, like, he didn't step in at short notice to fight McGregor the second time when, I believe it was Dos Anjos, dropped out, because that's not a sensible thing to do. Obviously, he wanted to have the time to prepare and do it all properly. But here he's stepping in at short notice. And I think that's very brave because if you look at the two fights, the Conor McGregor one told us almost nothing. You know, that was Aldo rushing forward in a moment of hot-headedness and getting clipped for fighting in a way that was, you know, played right into McGregor's style and wasn't Aldo's style. They could have fought the next day. Well, obviously they wouldn't because he had been knocked out cold. But, I mean, they could have fought the next day, you know, in terms of their preparation, and the fight could have been very different if Aldo just hadn't run at him. Whereas the Holloway fight was Aldo doing Aldo, and Holloway systematically taking him apart. So if I'm Aldo or Aldo's management, I'm saying, no way, Holloway needs way more prep than we would for like a second McGregor fight. At that time, obviously. Now McGregor's the biggest money attraction in MMA, and you would definitely take as long as possible to get ready for him, because if you beat him, you've got the McGregor belt. But, I mean, I'm struggling to find as much excitement in myself for that fight, obviously, because it's one we've seen already. And I do think that Aldo has slowed down a lot. But it could still be a fun one. It's just I was so excited for Holloway versus Edgar. I think that was probably one of my most anticipated fights in a long time, actually. Because the thing about Holloway is that he's going to be quite a hard sell in future because they made him fight almost everyone before he even got a title shot. So now all his title defenses will be in rematches, except Edgar. Next piece of news, John Jones' steroid hearing is pushed back to February. I'm assuming Malkikawa asked for that, or the team hasn't found what supplement they're going to blame yet for the Cold War era steroid in Jones's system. The Cold War era steroid, which in the weeks prior to him being caught, there were breakthroughs in the testing for. The whole thing is so stupid, and I'm so glad that fans have turned on him for what is obviously a lie. In my opinion. Can't say for a fact it's a lie because he got off the first time for tainted supplement. Other news, Volkan Oezdemir, Ivan Ooze, was arrested over battery. This whole thing's super shady because as soon as I saw it, I thought, oh god, another big hitting fighter who's got temper issues, which in itself is a symptom of CTE, dementia pugilistica, a faster temper. That's the one they always blame for Chris Benoit killing his wife and child and himself. But then you look into the details of it, and it happened ages ago. And this guy, who he is alleged to have assaulted, it sounds like firstly like a scrap in a bar over a disagreement. But secondly, this guy only came out of the woodwork once he realised Oezdemir was famous. So it's all super shady. But I'll hold judgment on that. It's not a good look for the UFC though. However, when I read battery, I was like, please don't be on your wife or girlfriend, because that is the absolute worst thing in MMA. And it came up in the New York hearing, in the New York Assembly hearing. They didn't know jack shit about anything in MMA, but they did know that a lot of fighters have been caught for domestic abuse. Cool bit of news, John Lineker has offered to step in for Dominic Cruz to fight Jimmy Rivera at UFC 219. Could you imagine a bigger style switch up than that? So power to Jimmy Rivera if he gets it done. They're talking about him for the next title shot. I mean, I'm on the Rafael Assunção train. I don't know. I know that his fight won't be interesting if he gets a title shot because he's a very slow-paced fighter and it's very rare that he finishes guys. But in terms of merit, he's definitely earned one. But yeah, you've gone from Dominic Cruz, Mr. Elusive and takedown artist, to John Lineker, I'm going to walk right at you and try and smash you as hard as I can. So big change up for Rivera, and I think probably a better match for Rivera because what I've seen of him, he's more tough and slick than he is, brilliant ring cutter or someone who's going to cut down the ring on Dominic Cruz and pressure. I mean, he might be Dominic Cruz, but I mean, in the fights that I've seen Jimmy Rivera, I think John Lineker is a easier matchup than Cruz. Because with Cruz, you've always got that problem where if you do really commit to walking him down and getting in his face, you're exposing yourself to getting taken down. Whereas John Lineker is only going to come at you and throw hands. He's always there as a target, and you don't have to be there for him. Nate Diaz versus Tyron Woodley. I don't know if I talked about this last week, but I think it happened more recently than that. But there were rumours breaking that this was being looked at for the year-end card, and I just can't get my head around how bad that matchup is. I mean, if by some strange happenstance Nate Diaz did win, it does set up Conor McGregor's third title. But we've got this weird situation where people forget that Nate Diaz, as a welterweight, wasn't very good. And as a lightweight, wasn't, top tier. His career has been made up of smashing mid-tier guys, fighting like a really top-tier guy, or even getting that title shot against Bendo, and looking completely out of place. If you take off the Donald Cerrone win in 2011, and you forget who Conor McGregor is, he's got really nothing special on that record. It's more the fact that he was an interesting last-minute matchup for Conor McGregor, and that he has that one win over Donald Cerrone in 2011. I mean, his only UFC title shot is remembered as one of the most one-sided in history, because everyone knows what you've got to do against Nate Diaz. You kick his legs, you take him down. Or you kick his legs and use that to set up punches, and you keep circling on him so that he can't stand there and get off punches on you. Tyron Woodley kicks legs very hard and takes dudes down. It's not a great matchup for him, especially with the size disadvantage. But we are entering an era where people are stupid enough to pay for that, based on knowing Nate Diaz's name and having been told that he was a welterweight when he fought Conor McGregor. And the other piece of news is that Holm versus Cyborg is looking very likely. I don't know if we've got confirmation on it yet, but that's going to be, I believe, end of the year or before the end of the year. So that's quite fun. I mean, I wouldn't headline a card with it because Holly Holm has not had a lot of success lately. But at least it is still Cyborg beating up smaller women, but at least it's someone who has a style that can make it interesting. I mean, personally, I've got no interest in seeing Cyborg fight almost anyone, and I'm sort of excited about this fight, so that's quite good. But that division, like, the problem with that fight is then you go, what are we doing after that? Haven't thought that through, lads. I mean, it's taken you the best part of a year to find someone that she can defend this made-up belt against. Who are you going to get after that? You're going to try and give Germaine Durademy enough money that she doesn't care about getting knocked out. But anyway, that's the news. Let's do some recaps. So, UFC Fight Night, a blur. Werdum versus Tybura was an event hosted in Australia. I've already said I wasn't keen on watching the. I watched these in the morning after they happened, but I wasn't keen on it after seeing the reaction to it online. And Elvis Sinisic, the king of rock and rumble, got on Twitter saying, hey, now it's still UFC history. So fair enough. Even if it is the most boring main card in UFC history, it's still history. But it was pretty woeful. So I'm just going to go through the things that I really liked on the card and ignore everything else. So if you're one of the guys who's going to say, like, but Jack, what did you think of so-and-so? Assume that I thought it was crap. My standout performer of the night was Tuivasa. I don't know if I'm saying that right because I watched this without the sound on. But someone was telling me about this guy before the fight even happened. And I'd never heard of him. And I was like, is this a meme? Is this man memes? But I was super impressed. Super impressed. I was watching it without the sound on. And from the way he was moving, I said, this lad's something to do with Mark Hunt. And I looked it up afterwards, and apparently he's his sparring partner and, like, mentor. I don't know if did he say anything about Mark Hunt in the ring afterwards? Because that would have been a great way to start your UFC tenure. Piss off the boss. But he looked phenomenal. He reminded me of what I like when Mark Hunt's doing his best, his best bit against opponents. And also like Mark Hunt with a bit more cardio, which is all Mark Hunt needs to be great. Firing off those, 2 shots at a time, diving into the clinch, even if it's on his own terms, punch and clutch, so that the opponent can't swing back at him. And then as soon as he's in the clinch, he's getting his hands underneath the opponent's chin, pushing it back, getting his head under, having a little rest there, and then pushing them off, or freeing his arms and getting away. And then a couple of times later on, the guy was so used to him pushing the head away and breaking free that he's desperately trying to hold on, and Tuivasa sticks through a couple of elbows in the meantime. Very cool. Nice low kicks, but not as many as you'd want to see. So typical Mark Hunt performance in that regard. And that downward elbow that he looks for when the guy's going for the clinch or the takedown, which, even if you think that it's going to work out perfectly, is still going to hit them in the back of the head. It's a little bit sketchy, but it's pretty cool. Hunt does it a lot. He did it to Tuivasa and Ben Rothwell. That's my new approach for names, by the way. You can tell me I'm pronouncing them wrong in the comments, but I'm going to go at it with confidence. Now, the finish came off a low kick that knocked the guy off his feet, so the guy kicked hard. Because I was looking at this guy's legs and I was thinking, this guy's thick. And not like Baby Albini, or whatever his name was, against Arlovski thick, like muscly dude. And he knocks the guy off his feet, and then as the guy's getting up, he runs in with a flying knee and starches him. My only complaint is that I'd have liked to see more. Like, I'd have loved it if this fight had gone 2 or 3 rounds. Very promising. Like him. As long as he's got some cardio, he'll be a force at heavyweight. Unless it turns out that he's got like a really shoddy chin or prone to injuries or something like that. So don't come back to me in like a year and be like, oh, this is that video where Jack said Tuivasa would be a star. I'm saying I like what I'm seeing. Then you had a flyweight bout between Ryan Benoit and Ashkan Mokhtarian. As I said, I didn't listen to the commentary on this, so I don't know the actual name. But I kind of liked what Mokhtarian was doing. Lots of ring circling, and then he'd burst in with a punch and Benoit would be completely unready for it. But about midway through the fight, I realised this guy's just doing laps of the cage. And it made me think, or have some sympathy for those people who say, this cage is too big for flyweights. It really did look it. Unmerciful Steve Percival was the referee. And I only noticed this because when they announced him, I was like, oh, that cunt. And then I thought he did a really good job staying out of the way, because this lad was just running all over the cage in circles. And then finally got head kicked and knocked out, which at that point I was like, good, because he just spent the whole match dragging it all the way across the canvas, and there were only a few engagements. You know, the strike stats came up just before the knockdown, and he was only just outlanding Benoit, or outpacing Benoit, or whatever, you know, in a fight that he'd been leading the footwork all across the cage. So he was doing an awful lot of stuff to no effect. I thought he looked good, though, very promising. I think he just needs to calm it down a little bit. You can move and always be moving without being moving at like 60 miles an hour running around the cage. Alexander Volkanovski stood out to me once again, because I had this with Cody Garbrandt, where I said one time that I saw them in the UFC, maybe like their first appearance, I was like, this guy's got a future. I like him. I'll be keeping my eye on him. And then 2 fights later, I rediscovered them, and I was like, oh, this guy's got a future. I'm keeping my eye on him, having not kept my eye on them. Volkanovski, I think it was his last fight I saw, or maybe the one before that, I don't remember, but it was in the UFC at any rate, and he was really using the inside low kick well, using the jab well, getting the takedowns and pushing the guy to the fence and constantly looking for that spinning elbow. And I remembered this at the point where, I think it was like in the second round, he hits a low kick on Shane Young, and I go, oh, I do remember this guy. He loves the inside low kick and the spinning elbows, and he immediately goes to the clinch and goes for his first spinning elbow of the fight. Just one of those moments that I made myself laugh. But yeah, that guy's promising. I like him. Shane Young apparently came in on short notice, so good for him. Didn't embarrass himself, you know, didn't get stopped or anything, so I'm sure the UFC will owe him one in future. But then that's probably like Vince McMahon owing you one. It's not actually one you could call in, the brass ring. Nik Lentz versus Will Brooks. Now, I like Will Brooks. Every fight he has, he does something in it where I'm like, that's pretty cool. This guy's got the moves. The problem is that he's got the moves, and like either his mental game is dog shit, or he just makes a miscalculation in every fight. But he did this 2 or 3 times against Nik Lentz. Nik Lentz, they announced afterwards he's got the most guillotine victories in UFC history, or the second most, with this win. But you can look down his record, or have trained with him for years, as apparently they did, and know that this guy is very good at guillotine chokes. And then you're still shooting with your head down, you know, low shots on him. You know, Will Brooks is a very good wrestler. If he wants to wrestle, he could just go to the clinch, do something safer. Or if you're dead desperate, shoot very low, go for a low single or something. We don't see those. But it seems like that's something that, you know, a big camp should be saying. Like, it's one thing to be Fedor and be like, oh, I'll just do whatever, and my whatever is good enough to deal with that guy's best area. But if you're in the modern era fighting guys who are firstly well-rounded and secondly much better in their one area than any fighter from 10 years ago was in their one area, you might as well try and avoid those areas. If you've got so many other skills, very strange. And then where he was showing some really cool Thai style and Dutch style kickboxing stuff in his fight against Ross Pearson, you know, kicking, step up left inside low kick, put it down behind you, counter right hook, or counter intercepting knee with the leg that's now behind you. This fight, he was trying to be a boxer, and as soon as he started doing it in the second round, he was doing a nice long stance, hand below Lentz's vision, then he'd bring it up in an up jab through the blind angle. Well, not necessarily an up jab, you know, some people call that the up jab if it comes from below. Other people strictly call like an uppercut straight thing an up jab. But he's throwing the jab from below Lentz's field of vision through the blind angle, and he's cracking it, he's opening Lentz up. But then he shoots in and gets guillotined again. So I don't know what's going on in that guy's head. I think I've seen a lot of people saying that he's a bust now, but if you're watching him, it's like Anthony Pettis. If you're watching him, you know, you can see that there's still the skill there. It's not like he's had this massive drop-off where he's lost all his speed, or he's suddenly weaker than everyone in the division and he's looking drawn out on the scale, or He's just not as fast as he used to be, or he's not seeing the counters and the opportunities. He's still got tons of potential. He's just made a series of very strange mistakes. But at any rate, the main event was Werdum versus Tybura, and it went pretty much how we expected. It was Werdum getting in Tybura's face and breaking the heavyweight mindset. The heavyweight division is full of fragile giants, and it's been that way in boxing, it's been that way in kickboxing, it's been that way in MMA. If you can get them thinking, this isn't going my way, they're going to collapse. This is why mental strength really stands out in the heavyweight division. If we're talking about welterweights or middleweights or something like that, it's not particularly remarkable. We never go like, oh, his mental strength and toughness, because they all sort of have it. It's for some reason that the heavyweight division is so rare, because you're always the boss in the gym, you're always beating up the sparring partners, you're always in control, and then suddenly you get in the cage, and if the guy jumps on you in the first 10 seconds, you're suddenly panicking. This is why Fedor and Cain Velasquez and Big Nog actually especially made careers out of this. Big Nog could survive a beating and then catch the guy late as he started to slow down. And guys will get disheartened even if things are going their way and they just can't put their opponent away. Heavyweights generally hate going the distance. But like Cain Velasquez, Fedor Emelianenko, Junior Dos Santos, guys like that who weren't the biggest heavyweights, but were always able to, even if the first round went to hell in a handbasket, they could just come out in the second round and say, okay, it's a new round, and start work again. And if things started going their way, it wouldn't be the same for the other man. And I think that's what Werdum is absolutely brilliant at. He's a fairly big heavyweight, he's 250, but he still gets in guys' faces and makes them curl up in a ball. And you could see this in Tybura. Tybura's best fight in the UFC was against Victor Pesta, where Pesta just let him work on the outside and then would occasionally rush at him and get countered. Werdum got up in his grill, was constantly on him, never really gave him a chance to think and set stuff up. Because Tybura's kind of thoughtful. His striking's ugly as sin, but he does do things where, like hooking off the jab to set up the high kick on the same side. Things that are weird that he's clearly put some thought and time into. But he got no space to do that, and Werdum was just slapping him around. Tough guy, lasted the distance, because that's one aspect of being a heavyweight. That mental fragility will mean that a lot of guys would have just quit before then. So good on him, and good on Werdum. If you watch this, it was Werdum striking clinic, but I hope you noticed how often he was just chasing with his chin way out in the air. And the fact that when he punches, his other hand comes back to his nips. Because it's constant, it's always been there, but people just imagined that it only appeared when he fought Stipe Miocic. Anyway, slow week, so let's do a couple of email questions, and then we're going to do some rapid-fire questions later. Hey Jack, just wondering, who, if anyone, would you recommend for newbies to look at who's successful in the big leagues of boxing, kickboxing, MMA, without a lot of fancy stuff? I feel like most people I see wandering into gyms nowadays only want to learn how to be Conor, Floyd, or someone else flashy and super technical. Who should a beginner be trying to study / emulate as far as striking goes to learn the fundamentals? From Aaron. Now, I normally say this in answer to any sort of who should I be studying question, but I think Frankie Edgar. Frankie Edgar doesn't knock a lot of guys out, so in terms of pure striking, we're not in the region of unstoppable, but as far as putting it all together in an MMA context, he is the man. He does it to bigger opponents, and he does the same techniques every time. Sidestepping, pivoting, moving around in front of the opponent, just keeping them a little bit off balance each time. Jabs, double jabs, high-low jabs, body jabs. He'll body jab a couple of times, and then he'll jab up towards the head, or then he'll body jab, and then instead of jabbing the head, he'll slam that lead hand into the lead shoulder, lightening the lead leg, and he'll pick it up for that Frankie Edgar style classic knee pick. And he just does stuff like that all the time. He can get guys striking with him, and then as soon as they're striking with him, he's taking them down. Nothing about Frankie Edgar's game is particularly flashy. Nothing would take a very long time to learn to do. When I say learn to do, I mean on its own. So whereas it'll take you time to learn how to do a wheel kick, and it'll take you more time to learn how to throw a wheel kick without falling over when there's someone in front of you. But the time that it takes to learn the stuff that Frankie Edgar's doing is just time learning to put it on someone who's resisting or picking up on their timing. Nothing. Frankie Edgar does is like a move you couldn't learn in like 10 seconds. You know, like it's all jabs and simple combinations and simple takedowns, just timed very, very well. Might be oversimplifying Frankie Edgar there a little bit. He does sometimes do flashy shit. He does throw the odd wheel kick, and of course an amazing wrestling pedigree helps. But in terms of fighting as a relationship between two people rather than you just trying to jam your techniques on them before they can jam them on you, he's an absolute master of it. For basic technique in every area of the boxing game, I'd say Roberto Duran, because again, he went up in weight for much bigger fighters. They called him Hands of Stone, but his punch really didn't carry up with him. I mean, he could still hit if the guy got caught clean, and he'd hurt people with his punches, but he never had that sort of like stunning power, even after he went up to welterweight. I mean, he knocked down Iran Barkley, gave Iran Barkley the first knockdown of his career, but with a massive size disadvantage, like 30 pounds. But that was because he caught him perfectly clean. The rest of the fight was just him putting it on Barkley with technique and timing and anticipation. He's a perfect example of a guy who could draw out what he wanted from the opponent with his jab. He'd draw out their jab with his jab and then counter under it, or just prevent them from doing what they wanted to do by getting in close and occupying the center line, always working those short little digging punches up the center. And then if he felt a punch coming, he could weave under it and throw back a hard punch of his own. That's, lifetime of experience in that range. But he was a guy whose techniques, like, you can watch the same stuff play out in however many fights he had, like 80, I suppose. But every fight of his, you can see that he does come up with different ideas throughout his career, but it's the same few things that are just being repeated against all sorts of opponents. It doesn't matter if they're bigger, smaller, in-fighter, out-fighter, big puncher, cardio freak. Doesn't matter. He's still creating the same opportunities and exploiting the same opportunities. In kickboxing, I would say... No, I don't want to say Nicky Holzken because he's not as defensively sound as he should be. Maybe Rico, because like as a heavyweight, he's one of the few that's really like quite technically sound. I'm running out of modern kickboxers. I've sort of dropped off watching it. I'm going to the one of the Glory events in a couple of weeks, but I just don't know who's in it anymore. I don't think they've announced half the matchups. I'm going to be there, and I thought, fuck it, might as well buy some tickets. Ayats isn't a bad one actually, but then he is like 6'10". I don't know how tall Peter Ayats is, but he's a tall guy and he benefits from that a lot because he likes throwing up high kicks. Maybe Petrosian. I mean, he does have superhuman reaction speeds, and he benefits a lot from being a southpaw against orthodox fighters. Having the hands in place to shut down his opponent's stuff. But if you want to learn how to systematically take away the tools of someone, regardless of who they are and what the tools are, you can basically watch Petrosian work people out. He's like, how am I going to take that away? Okay, that's that sorted. Now let's work on taking this away. And then by like round 2, he'll go, okay, I should probably put in some offense now. Anyway, hope that helps, Aaron. Dear Jack, your fight analyses are almost exclusively technical. What do you think of analysis of things like mentality and so-called philosophy? For example, Robin Black constantly discusses flow states, compares fighters to startups, etc. Just bollocks? ? Useless pseudoscience ? Legitimate aspects of fighting outside of your purview ? Best, Nico. The way that I look at it is, of course, I don't want people to think that we're just talking about the cold technical. I like talking about the cold technical because that's shit that I can take away and work on my own. The mental aspect of the game, everyone knows that the fighting is 90% half mental, as Tim Sylvia said, but or half the fight game is 90% mental. I forget which one he said, but they both are stupid. The thing that I always say about fights, or a fight generally, and it kind of gets overlooked because I do mostly technical stuff, but I've always believed that a fight is a meeting of people at one stage in their life where everything going around them is going to be carried into the ring. You know, there are fighters who are good at putting it in the background, just pushing it to the back of their head, forgetting about it. But everything that happens to you shapes who you are in that moment of that fight. You don't get to play 2 games against someone every season, you know, or however many it is in a normal sport with a ball. But, you know, you get 1 shot at this guy, maybe 2 if you're lucky. 3 if you've cocked one up in the middle, or that you lost the first one and then came back. But you aren't going to get a whole host of opportunities to show that you are consistently better than this guy. You get 1 chance to show, okay, I'm better than him, and it's only going to be on that night, but everyone in the world of fighting will say, well, that's proven that he's the better man. Which puts incredible stakes at play. You know, that's, if you lose, people aren't going to go like, oh, well, you know, he just had his first child, so he's probably a little bit sleep deprived, and, you know, maybe didn't have the hunger there, and blah, blah, blah. People are going to go, well, you know, he lost, so we know that he's not as good a fighter as the guy who beat him. One of the reasons that I don't talk so much about psychology and things like that is, firstly, you know, it's not an area I'm as experienced in. I don't read about psychology for fun. I read about history for fun and shit like that. But also, I don't believe I can ever know what's going on in someone else's head. And I don't believe that most of the people in the fights know what's going on in their own heads. You can observe this in, like, your day-to-day life. If you go to a training session or something like that, some days you will be fighting a guy for, like, a guard pass or something like that, and you're going like, oh, I can't let this guy pass, can't let this guy pass, and then you'll just go, oh, fuck it, have the pass. And those are the sort of little breakages in mentality that if you put them, you know, under the spotlight or the ring lights in a proper fight, that's the sort of thing that a fight can hinge on, and you won't know why you gave up that day. You know, you'll just say, oh, fuck, gave up that pass, shouldn't have done that. Maybe you were having a bad day. Maybe you were hungry. Maybe you were sleep deprived or something, but you don't know. And I think fighters struggling to find out why they did worse in one fight than they did in another, or, you know, tired earlier or mentally broke earlier, that's when you see all this, oh, well, I'm going to change camp, oh, I'm going to change weight, this, that, and the other. It's guys looking for answers. In terms of flow state and startups, I don't follow startups or Silicon Valley or anything like that. And flow state, I know almost nothing about. I am your humble servant, and I basically just talk about why one dude got smashed in the head and the other dude didn't. Because psychology or not, if your hand's in the right place or you're ducking your head after you throw, you should be okay. But again, mistakes come through because of mental failing. It's like, we talk about this all the time. Discipline is the most in fact, I think I said this on the last show. Discipline is the most valuable thing you can have in a fighter. When he's tired and beat up and just wants to go home but has like 2 more rounds to fight, that's when, if he can keep everything technical, not get over anxious, not be too conservative, not be too aggressive, remember his basics and his science, even that deep in a fight, that's the most valuable quality a fighter can have. Doing your job, basically, is the most valuable quality a fighter can have. Not so much their personal motivation or belief or anything like that. As long as you can, whatever it takes for you to stay in there and do your job without getting distracted or worried or overconfident. Bit of a rambling answer, but I think that's the sort of area we're in when we're talking about this. We're sort of hypothesizing for why people lose or win. But no, I definitely think there's value to it. Sports psychology is a very interesting area, which I just haven't had the time to put study into. Right, let's talk about this fight happening in Shanghai then. So Anderson Silva got popped for being a juicy slut. We don't actually know what he got popped for yet, I don't believe. I've been trying to keep up to date on it, and I haven't seen anything. But you feel like if it were weed or cocaine or something in a nasal spray, they'd have told you by now. Instead, he put out a vague, rambling answer where he was saying that his team were working with USADA to find out what went wrong. This, of course, leaves us with the question of Anderson Silva's legacy. which is something that I'll probably get an article out of next week, and get all the fanboys in, good and angry, whip them up. But in the meantime, the real hero of the middleweight division, and if you don't believe in Anderson Silva's accomplishments anymore, the de facto GOAT of the UFC middleweight division, His Fistic Majesty, Michael the Count Bisping, is stepping in on short notice to fight Kelvin Gastelum. I really don't like this. I think I said this last week. It's within the period of his medical suspension from his last fight, but fortunately it's overseas in Shanghai where, it's the Wild East. Nobody gives a shit. But if someone does die, these are the sort of things that the press are going to jump on immediately, even if he was like 1 day within his medical suspension. Which is why I always get on at Bellator about scheduling Kimbo Slice to fight within his drug suspension overseas, or fighting in jurisdictions that don't give out medical suspensions so that they can have Matt Mitrione get dropped in his first Bellator fight in London like 30 days later, have Cyborg Santos knocked out by 150 blows to the head in May or whatever it was, and then have him fight Michael Venom Page in July. And now, Frank Mir's suspension isn't up till April, but he's definitely going to be fighting sooner than that because Bellator don't give a shit. But anyway, I like getting on at organisations over that because as soon as someone does die, and they will, it'll be much easier if they've all been playing by the book all along. If you say like, well, we've been going for the medical suspensions and we've been going for the drug suspensions, and we don't let anyone fight before we know that their time is up in the jurisdiction where they just fought. But that's just me. I'm very cynical like that, and I'm like, please don't ruin the sport when someone does inevitably die. In the meantime, Michael Bisping versus Kelvin Gastelum. Kelvin Gastelum has been having a wonderful run at middleweight by being exactly what we said Fedor and Kane and people were at heavyweight. He just is faster, puts the pace on guys, wilts them, tires them out. I mean, he fought Tim Kennedy, who is a gigantic middleweight, tired him out dead easy. I mean, it was Tim's first fight back in a long time, first fight back under USADA. All those things that generally mark a difference in a fighter in recent years. But yeah, I thought it looked brilliant. That what you see from Kelvin Gastelum and what you see from like his early days on Tough is that he's a grappler, but not like a BJJ one, like a old school wrestling one. So he'll go to his hands and knees, and the other guy will grab him around the waist, and then he'll do an arm roll or some shit like that. There's a fight on Tough, I think, with, well, I don't know, some hillbilly, but they end up taking each other's backs about 6 times each before one of them can finish. So he has this really weird style, and it works really well against these big middleweights. He just builds up to his hands and knees, which is, of course, a position where you're not taking the weight of the other person on your lungs and chest while you're trying to breathe. So I suppose there's that advantage to it. And of course, you're already building back up to your feet. Very hard to, there's a lot more steps getting back up to your feet from bottom side control than there is from bottom turtle. For a start, you have to turn to your knees. He's hit some gorgeous arm rolls in recent years in Granbys and things like that. Did get finished with, I think it was an arm triangle choke against Weidman, but boxed him up briefly in the early going of that fight. Really nice hands, very crisp, very fast, throws lots of punches, doesn't rely too much on one or two. When he's confident in getting his hands going, he's very, very dangerous. When he's standing back and like fighting one shot at a time, he's not so much. That's what Tyron Woodley was able to do against him, sort of turn him into a 1 or 2 punch fighter. And that really wasn't a great showing for him. Great showing for his chin. I mean, he took some hard ones, but otherwise not so great. Bisping, of course, we talked about tons in the lead up to the George St. Pierre fight. Nice jab, high pace. A lot of what Kelvin Gastelum's good at, he's good at, but orthodox rather than southpaw, and a bit bigger. Very good on the ground, very good at getting up, as you saw against George St. Pierre, who held down everyone that he's ever fought, and Michael Bisping got up from under him fairly easily the first 2 times, and then worked from the guard the 3rd time, and then got knocked almost unconscious the 4th time, and gave up his back. But should be a decent fight. I'm not happy with the timing of it. I think that's a very weird decision for Michael Bisping to jump in, but he is clearly saving the card. If you look down the rest of this card, it's just... The UFC haven't even bothered to get photos of more than half the people on it. That's awful. Only the main and the co-main have 2 photos. Every other one, it's someone versus a shadow, or two shadows fighting each other. But it's Shanghai. The UFC's expansion into Asia was like, they went all out. They got Kung Lee. They were like, you're Asian, let's go to Macau. Which apparently worked. Apparently the Chinese loved Vietnamese American Kung Lee. But Tough China was awful. And then they just sort of went, okay, we're still putting on cards there, but we're going to really half-arse it. Let's have a look at the rest of that card because it's dog shit. Bisping v Gastelum. Jing Liang versus Otto. That's the other one with two photos. No idea who either of them are. Alex Caceres versus Guan, who is just a shadow. Salikov versus Garcia. One shadow in that picture. Magomed Shapirov, who is awesome. Zabit, we will watch him. Versus Marias, who is a shadow. Keenan versus Nash. One of them is a shadow. Curran versus Xiaonan, who is a shadow. I'm going to guess that the blonde lass is Curran. Yadong versus Kandre. Or Kander, two shadows. Oh no, another one with two pictures here. Sherman versus Abdurakimov. Yanan versus Mizani, one shadow. Buren versus Dai, one shadow. Asuka versus Yaozong, one shadow. So it looks like a load of Asian jobbers are going to get beat up by people who, well, as someone's put it here on my Facebook feed, people with shit managers. I think if you got a fighter, have them fight in Vegas or at home. That's about it, really. I mean, like, yeah, great tax breaks in Vegas, and Vegas shows are UFC's bread and butter. They put on good shows there. Anywhere else doesn't seem to be worth the hassle. But then if you're not in a position to, well, maybe that's part of why they put all these jobbers on, well, not jobbers, but all these really, really not interesting talents on overseas cards, not just because they can get away with it, because they can push their managers around. Who knows? Anyway, we're going to go to the Facebook for some rapid-fire questions. Zhao asks, do you think Rafael Assunção is capable of beating Garbrandt or Cruz? How do you see these fights happening? Slowly, really slowly. I'd like him against Cruz. I think he deserved a shot at Cruz a long time ago. Decent low kicks. Stands out in the open. If he makes Cruz come to him, I suppose he's got a better chance of getting that done. Haven't really seen too much of Assunção off his back recently, so I don't know. Maybe the takedowns are a problem. Maybe they're not. I don't know. But Garbrandt, I think maybe a tougher fight because Garbrandt's such a heavy hitter. But equally, we're now all questioning Garbrandt's chin. So if you can get him walking onto something, and of course, Assunção's got a very long style. Whereas Garbrandt's best weapons are the left hook and the counter right hand, so stuff in the kitchen, basically. Maybe Garbrandt would show more than two jabs in that fight, because he's got a great jab, but he never ever shows it. Stuart asks, as an inexperienced fighter, if you wanted to land one clean punch or kick against another inexperienced opponent in sparring, what techniques would you recommend learning as a cheese move that they won't see coming? Oh, the Zulu. Throw the right hand as if you're set it up with a right hand leading into a left hook, and then throw the right hand as a hand trap into the left hook. But I would suggest against learning cheese strategies for other inexperienced fighters. I always like to think of I think it was Ryan Hall said it on one of his DVDs. He said, that might work against another blue belt, purple belt you're rolling against in the gym, but why build yourself towards that? Work like you want to do it against Cabrinha or Marcelo Garcia. I mean, obviously you probably won't, but if you're working like that's what you're going to try and do, then you're consciously thinking about all the openings that you're giving the opponent, and you're learning more rather than being like, well, we're both inexperienced, maybe I can cheese him. Because it's not a fight, it's training. Zach says, your girlfriend and mum switch bodies and the only way to switch them back is to smash either one. Which do you smash? Oh, it's Freaky Friday. Maybe in your world. For me, that's just a Freaky Wednesday. No comment. Let's move on. Mark says, who in your opinion is the least naturally gifted fighter on your top 10 pound for pound, as in they're as good as they are through hard work rather than raw natural talent? I'm going to say Edgar, as always, because he fights with, even though he's obviously got physical gifts, he always fights at a size disadvantage. Jimmy says, Scott Coker's best Grand Prix, question mark. Well, the last one turned out to be like a real bust. Aside from getting to see Josh Barnett easily work all over Sergei Haritonov, and a good final between Daniel Cormier and Josh Barnett, but it was nothing anyone expected. Like, they poached Overeem halfway through. You got that boring fight between Overeem and Werdum. Fedor got beat up early because, of course, he did. Yeah, really not a great fight, a great tournament all round. So this one can only, things can only get better, as the song by D. Ream said. However, we did get to see Josh Barnett's style all over Sergei Haritonov, who, for years, people were saying, well, Sergei's the dark horse of the heavyweight division. I mean, he's got world-class sambo, and he was training on the Olympic team for the Kazakhstani boxing team. And then you see him, and all he's really got is a right hand. And his grappling has completely atrophied. He had no idea what to do on the ground against Josh Barnett. You can watch guys and be like, well, he's trying, but that top guy's so much better. And you can watch guys and be like, he's not even trying to do something. That's what it was like watching Sergei Haritonov against Barnett. Yeah. And then he got knocked out the other week by a Walmart greeter, apparently. Or a guy who was working in Walmart part-time. But doubtless he'll get in as a reserve on this tournament, and everyone will be on about how he's the dark horse of the heavyweight division once again, even though he's 40, and the last good thing he did was knock out Pedro Hizo in 2005. Anyway, Jeffrey says, thoughts on Tenshin Nasukawa's striking style from a pure striking perspective and how that adapts to MMA? I don't know how it adapts to MMA because he's fighting nobodies. I like him. I've only seen bits of him in pure kickboxing matches. I would have to... the thing is that he's now in this point of his career where he fought a really good Thai, won by a really quick back kick to the head or whatever it was, and now he's fighting jabronis in MMA matches or mixed rules matches. Ben says, could you lay out a winning game plan for Paige Van Zandt if she ever fights Joanna for the 125 belt? Oh, someone's already said don't, but I'm going to do it anyway. Do nothing. Exactly the same way she beat Shevchenko. Joanna lands a lot of strikes by people coming at her and presenting her the target. Bit worse for Valentina. She will literally stand there doing nothing if you don't do anything. But Paige Van Zandt is not that kind of fighter. She's got there by going straight at people face first and trying to overwhelm them. Charles says, does Matt Brown have the best elbows in UFC history? Jordan Mean would like a word, mate. Craig says, assuming Haruo Mifuji gets his marching orders. Shit, I've not been keeping up with this, but I heard he, assaulted someone with a bottle. And with the current swathe of celebrity fuck-ups, that could be like a sexually assaulted with a bottle. So, yeah, assuming he gets his marching orders, should he be on standby for the Bellator heavyweight tournament? Or just fight McGregor for all the belts in a bar with bottles? Oh, there we go, bottles. I would love to see a former sumo wrestler do actual things in MMA, actually train for it. But the only reason they leave sumo is because they're so banged up that they start losing. You don't leave sumo when you're in your peak. Though Boruto was actually pretty decent in a couple of his fights. What did happen to Andy Risty, says Praveen? I have no idea. He also says, if Max Holloway loses, does he regain boy status? Might have to rethink it because Rose Namajunas is still my girl. Reng Sayi, which may well be a Thai name because I'm having so much trouble with it, says, Jack, the Pride Lightweight Grand Prix podcast was bloody brilliant. Oh, he's already listened to it. Oh, twice, he says. Quick question. How would combat sports change if MMA gloves were used without hand wraps? And how do you think the situation would change further if the gloves had no padding, just a bit of leather covering the knuckles? That's interesting. I think with a bit of leather, you're still... Well, it depends how thick the leather is, because, yeah, the main thing that taking away padding from gloves does is add back more cuts. Occasionally broken fingers, but if you had a little bit of... I don't know where the crossing over point between padding enough to stop the fingers from breaking, or, protect the fingers a bit, and padding enough to stop cuts. I don't know where the crossover is on that. So it could be interesting. No wrist wraps, no hand wraps rather. Rory McDonald fought with no hand wraps, I think against Paul Daly. But yeah, people would have to learn to punch properly. So many guys get in the habit of having their hands really heavily wrapped, so that they can't even bend. And then when they hit something like in a street fight or something like that, they break their hand. The wrist alignment is one of the trickiest parts of punching to get right. I remember one time I'd never seen one of those like wall bags before that has it's a oblong or a rectangle rather, a cuboid, but the top sort of bulges out so that it makes like an uppercutting target. But it was considerably lower than I would have it if it were mine. So it was like uppercutting a midget. But I had taken my hand wraps off and I just wound up one and unleashed it on this thing and buckled my wrist fucking badly. So yeah, you can have all these sort of like little kinks in your wrist that you do not realise when you're wrapping your hands up and keeping them safe. Also, wrist locks would probably be more viable. If you watch Pancrase, guys get mount and they'll just keep going for wrist locks. But then hitting on the ground in Pancrase was sort of a no-no. Anyway, I reckon that'll do us for today. Hopefully this Shanghai event somehow surprises me. To be fair, the guys I'd never heard of were pretty good on this undercard of the Australia event. So maybe all the guys I've never heard of are actually really interesting. Maybe some of these Chinese fighters come out and do some weird kung fu shit. Maybe that's a little bit racist. Maybe I'm sort of hoping that it happens anyway. At any rate, if you want to email the podcast, fightsgonbypodcast@gmail.com. Buy my book Notorious. Subscribe to my website, fightprimer.com, where I am putting up every article I write everywhere. And if you'd like to support the podcast and get the history lectures, which are a treat, there's a Customato one coming soon. Well, Floyd Patterson Customato coming soon. And the Pride Lightweight Grand Prix just gone up. Head over to Patreon. It's been a pleasure. I'm your boy, always on the level, Jack Slack.